It's a really exciting time to be a DC Comics fan right now because Zack Snyder's Justice League is right around the corner. Now, I'm stoked. I'm ready. Like, I am clearly a huge Justice League fan. Like, look at this. Look at this madness. Look what's going on in my lap. All of this was just, it's been in my lap for years. I finally have an excuse to lift it into frame. So I'm all set. I have been ready and waiting for this real version of the Justice League movie to finally come out. Fun fact, it's the very first movie I ever reviewed here on my channel. But the existence of this movie is not without its backstory, and I feel like that's something too important to not go into. So before the movie hits the airwaves and we finally get a chance to watch it and hopefully love it and review it, as I will be doing here, obviously, I want to talk about the troubled history of Justice League and the DCEU, at least the DCEU that Zack Snyder had in mind. Of course, if you end up enjoying this video essay, please feel free to give it a thumbs up and give some love to that subscribe button as well. Now let's take a gander under the hood of this Batmobile and see exactly what it took to put it all together. By the time the DC Extended Universe came to fruition, the MCU was already well underway. And Zack Snyder was the one who got to kickstart things, but he wouldn't be doing it exactly the same. See, Marvel was all about giving every individual character a solo film before throwing them together in one giant mixed candy dish. With DC, on the other hand, Snyder had a different plan, and it involved just 5 movies. And this is the story of how his plan was usurped by art's greatest nemesis, cowardly studio intervention. So, kicking off the DCEU was Man of Steel. It was a great way to introduce this world and get things started, and personally, I think the movie has just gotten better every time I've watched it. But while Man of Steel was being filmed, the first Avengers movie hit theaters. Of course, Avengers was a gigantic hit, so the higher-ups at WB got scared. Thankfully, it was a bit too late to change things drastically, so Snyder more or less got to make the Man of Steel movie he wanted to make. Next came movie number 2, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. This is where studio cowardice really started to pull the House of Cards apart, because at this point, Snyder was finalizing his plans. He had a grand story to tell, and with Man of Steel being successful enough to warrant sequels, he was told he'd be allowed to bring that story to life. So he set to work on Batman v Superman. At the same time, over at Marvel, that studio was hard at work on its own giant sequel, Avengers: Age of Ultron. WB was still quaking from how well the first Avengers did, so Snyder's creative freedom took a hit. A few panic-fueled notes later, and we ended up with a movie that was just okay. Thankfully, the Blu-ray corrected WB's mistake, giving us the 3-hour director's cut that, in a lot of people's opinion, is the far superior movie. But now we have to take a quick detour and talk about the first offshoot DCEU picture, Suicide Squad. David Ayer was hired to take on directing duties, and the movie looked promising. But remember, this is a comic book film about a bunch of morally questionable C-list and D-list characters, and Marvel had already done a fantastic job giving us the very same thing 2 years earlier with Guardians of the Galaxy. So once again, Warner Brothers panicked, slowly chipping away at David Ayer's creative freedom until the film they ended up squirting into theaters was a hot mess. Ayer, of course, would love to show the world his director's cut of Suicide Squad, but as of right now, there are no plans for that movie to ever see the light of day. Which brings us back to the third of Zack Snyder's planned 5-movie arc, Justice League. And this, folks, is where things get really heartbreaking. Snyder had plans for this story, big plans, and his plans were so ambitious that, once again, WB got cold feet. They were too scared of Marvel's success. They didn't want to take the risk. They kept interfering and micromanaging, picking apart Snyder's third movie until not much of its original skeleton remained. This has never been confirmed, but allegedly, Warner Brothers was in the process of severing ties with Snyder and handing the reins of Justice League to another director. And it was around this time that Snyder's daughter unfortunately passed away. With such a huge personal tragedy taking place, Snyder, understandably, stepped away from filmmaking to be there for his family. The director's chair was empty, and WB could fill it with someone who had no vision, someone who would be happy to make their watered-down, cheap, rushed version of this story. And who do they get to calm their fears? Well, how about the guy who directed those 2 huge movies that made them so scared in the first place? Yeah, Joss Whedon, director of The Competition, was pulled in to finish cutting together whatever scraps of Snyder's Justice League were left over. And what he ended up giving us was a short, cheap, humdrum, instantly forgettable popcorn flick. Like I said, it was the very first movie I ever reviewed on this channel, and I feel the same way now as I did back then. Justice League is fine. It's fine. But it's the Justice League, and the Justice League deserves better than just fine. In the years since, fans who've known about the movie's messy production have clamored for WB to release the Snyder Cut. A lot of people, myself included, wanted to see Snyder's true vision for these beloved characters. Last year, we got our wish. In May 2020, Zack Snyder confirmed that he would be putting together his original cut for all the world to see. A 4-hour-long superhero frenzy. Justice League the way it was meant to be. Now, this is where things get really interesting and really upsetting, at least for me. I didn't discover this until recently, but those final 2 movies Snyder had in mind, they were Justice League Part 2 and Part 3. And according to Snyder, all 3 of these Justice League films would have told one gigantic story in the same vein as Lord of the Rings. This breaks my effing heart. Imagine it. We could have had a giant trilogy of giant movies about one of the coolest superhero teams ever created. Rather than just feel like sequels, they could have weaved together one epic tale that would have blown the doors off of movie theaters. But we didn't get this. And the reason? Cowardice. The studio put the money before the art. WB was scared of Marvel and made rash decisions out of fear. And the final nail in the coffin here is that most of the Justice League actors had such a miserable experience working on that movie that they don't seem to have any interest in coming back. So even if Zack Snyder's Justice League is universally beloved by all, and WB caves and allows him to finish his 5-movie arc unfettered, it might not even be possible to get the band back together, so to speak. The damage might already be irreversible. Obviously, as a DC fan and as a Justice League fan, I'm very excited that this movie gets a chance to exist. But I think at the end of the day, the most important reason for this movie to exist is, I don't know the guy, but I feel like it's a perfect way for Zack Snyder himself to get some closure. Remember, he was in the process of making this movie when the worst thing that could have happened to anybody, the loss of their child, happened to him. To be able to kind of step back, rewind the clock just a little bit, and finish this monstrous, epic piece of art that was consuming his life before his life was pulled out from underneath him, I think it's a beautiful, cathartic way to turn pain into something beautiful. And I'm just happy that Zack Snyder gets to do this for himself, if for nothing else, as a way of moving past that part of his life and carrying on. So I'm happy for him. I'm happy this movie finally gets to be made. And who knows, maybe it'll be so good we'll get to see parts 2 and 3, but I'm not holding my breath for that. In the meantime, I hope everybody enjoyed this video. I hope everybody enjoys Zack Snyder's Justice League. And remember, Zack Snyder himself has become quite the spokesperson for the American Society for Suicide Prevention. And if you'd like to help out, donate, do whatever you can to help the millions of people who might be going through some terrible, terrible things, and, you know, just maybe prevent something awful like this from ever happening again, click the link below in the description. I'll add one that'll take you right to the suicide prevention charity, and you can do your part to help out. So let's all help one another out. Let's all give each other a big hug and sit down, cuddle up together, socially distanced together, of course, and watch this 4-hour beast of a movie, because it is what Justice League deserves. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. My name is Andrew Fantasia. I'll see you all here next time, and until then, adios.